2020?
Correct.
Oh, yeah.
So they're painting a portrayal, and scientifically in epidemiology, we have something called the case fatality rate. So of how many people get sick, how many die. Like this thing is going to kill everyone. Like 80-90% of the population could die from this disease. That's how they were portraying this.
Right.
It turns out that number was much lower, and somewhere in the percentage category, not the 70, 80, or 90%. So I went real quick from thinking that this was going to be the thing that could, cripple society, to being, I'm not wearing a mask in public.
Right.
But my behavior and action in early 2020, the first weeks, I started looking for a place in a remote area. So I'm considering Alaska, Maine, northern Maine, western Wyoming, or the UP of Michigan. My search criteria based on what I knew as an expert, you want to have access to an airport, transportation, high-speed internet, an hour drive from a major city center that's not too populated. Because if it's going to end the planet, it's going to kill everyone, you want distance from other people to break transmission cycles, at least so you can isolate yourself. So I bought a year's supply worth of MREs. I started stockpiling other things, some ammunition, make a plan. And my wife and I land in the UP of Michigan. Everyone, sort of thought I was crazy for doing this. And next thing you know, everybody wants to come visit me during the lockdowns. They said you were right about everything.
Yeah, I know.
And,
I live this too. Yes. Yeah.
In the back of my mind, though, I'm thinking about constantly that, and I know that EcoHealth Alliance had been engaged in this gain of function work at EcoHealth, at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And I'm like, a bat coronavirus emerging in Wuhan, and I'm watching the news and the TV at through 2020, and they're like, oh, it was a pangolin, or it was the wet market. And I'm arguing on social media that that's not possible, that doesn't make sense from an emerging infectious disease standpoint, because a wet market, and the specific wet market in China, is a seafood market.
That's why it's called a wet market.
Yes, but Western Americans,
it's not for mammals, it's for creatures from the sea. Yeah,
people in the United States have a very myopic view of the world typically. And
I know.
I'm sitting here arguing. I'm like, this is a fish market. And in fact, I'm looking at the pictures of it, and my assessment is like, this is the kind of place I'd go buy groceries. I live in New York City, a very nice place. So I'm like, none of this is adding up. And, you're watching the story evolve. And next thing you know, my former boss, Dr. Peter Daszak, is put on the committee that's sent over by the World Health Organization to go investigate the origin of the disease. And this is getting weirder and weirder and weirder. And I know all the players involved. I mean, I had met and worked with not Dr. Anthony Fauci himself, but his deputy, Dr. Morens. I had been out to dinner with him. I mean, I knew all the players in this big thing. I mean, I had been groomed since I was a PhD student to be a Dr. Anthony Fauci replacement, or that type of person. So, I mean, I knew all the people in the system. And working on these things, and the program managers, the officers, the different branches of the government. So I'm watching this all play out, and I just can't believe it. And it's the kind of thing where I'm yelling at my computer screen in private. Like they put fucking Dr. Daszak in charge of investigating the origins. He's probably the one that caused it. And little did I know that this was all part of the psychological operation and cover up. And I just started becoming more callous and entrenched about really going on.
So how can you explain that a little bit? What does that mean?
Well,
why would putting the guy who had a hand in the creation of the virus in charge of investigating the origin of the virus be part of a PSYOP?
This credit card has an interest rate that's really, really low. How low?
To give the perception that it's an independent person that's well trusted within the wildlife community and the scientific community, that we know what you're doing, you can trust what we're saying. Because if you look at how the psychological operation was waged, and I'm not just saying the U.S. government, but multiple entities, the pharmaceutical industry, the big companies that back all these different things, special interests, just generally. You take the guy who's responsible, you put him in charge of the investigation. He's really, that he's not going to tie it back to himself, but he's already been branding himself for years and decades as being a person that cares, a crunchy NGO person. And he has the relationships in wealthy communities on the West Coast and East Coast, the elite, to convince them that this is, a naturally emerging disease from the wet market. So, he's already the point man. He's already sold everyone all this bullshit related to, we're going to go and forecast pandemics, and really he's the guy who caused one.
It's really, yeah. Thank you for saying. I just wanted you to explain that a little more fully. I've again lived this, seen it, and it is effective because it's so shocking that someone would do that. It's so brazen, the chutzpah required to do something like that. You take not just like some random guy, but the guy who's responsible, and you start telling everyone he's the savior. Wow, man. That the human brain, a normal person is bewildered by that, is thrown off balance by that.
Well, at least in my life, and we were discussing this a little bit at breakfast, the more of you see of this trickery, the more that you're exposed to, and they actually talk about this in the psychological research, the more, oftentimes the more aware you become of a phenomenon, the more you see it. And then once you start seeing it, you can't stop seeing it.
I know.
And that's how they say, people become conspiracy theorists because they see the conspiracy theorists. And
well, that's why very few young people, I think this is changing fast, but my whole life, like young people always bought the story. And then you meet guys in their 70s, particularly people who'd work for the government. And I've known a lot of those who would get more conspiracy minded as they aged. Have you ever noticed this?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's just...
Now, why is that?
Well, experience.
Exactly.
Experience and living life. And I do that now. I'm 43, and you see someone in their 20s or 19, they have a very idealistic view of the world. And I used to be one of those people.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it. I made it to my late 30s with that, but mid 30s. But anyway, wow, that's wild. So you're sitting up at the UP with your scientist wife watching this stuff on CNN going, you must be like going bonkers watching this.
Well, internally, and I was working on a startup company, and I was distracted by other things. And, because I was in the UP, this was only via social media or the news. So I'm pretty detached from it. What happens is in late 2021, the operation turns focus towards me, because now I'm being, I think, viewed as a threat based on some of the things I put on LinkedIn at the time and other social media posts, that I needed to be contained in some way.
And what sort of things were you saying?
So it was really Dr. Malone and I and a few other people who were trying to remain anonymous. I know who they are. We're just telling the truth. So first of all, around the disease, that this was not a naturally emerging pathogen. And I could tell that it was not, based on a number of facts, based on how this disease was spreading, the type of agent it was, the coincidence that we had been funding this exact type of work. And I had the original documents at this laboratory. It was just that their story and how the people involved were saying things about the disease which weren't true. And specifically how this type of disease would emerge. I mean, that's what my PhD is in. I mean, I've worked in this field, and I knew that these people knew that they were lying, because these people were qualified experts as well. So why are these people lying about how this disease would emerge?
Great question.
And so it drives more questions, right? Every time you have something that's weird, it doesn't fit the pattern, or isn't the thing that it's supposed to be, you ask more questions. And as this, the timeline of COVID is happening or occurring, so we're going through the lockdowns. They're trying to get the vaccine Operation Warp Speed. They're trying to do all these things. That's all distracting everyone from the origin question. And the people involved in the origin discussions and the psychological operation of it was that, in my opinion, is that they were actually trying to get society bogged down in the technical details of very sophisticated scientific jargon, which very few people were qualified to understand or argue or debate, and then label it as those people were the only people who were qualified experts to be able to debate. So therefore, there was no debate allowed.